Folks, welcome inside the Parisi Palace, high above 3773 East Broadway. This is the Jake Feinberg Show. Coming on Power Talk, thank you so much for making us part of your day today. Happy April Fools to everybody out there. It's good to play some pranks on people. It's also our divine right to be happy, and I hope that people out there are looking towards the light. And I get a chance today to speak to a master rhythmist, somebody who's been on my radar for a long time, very tasteful drummer, and actually a conduit for me getting into melodic improvisation or jazz based on the track and the album that we just came in with. A very fluid drummer and somebody who early on had a chance to play with some of the original masters of the music and realized that when he got out of his own way, he could be a conduit for music coming through him from the heavens. Peter Erskine, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Hi, Jake. Thank you for that generous introduction. Was that the Joe Farrell album?
Oh, man, that was Malibu, man. That was the first tune, you know. When I first started, even just before I started collecting records, I would collect CDs, and I was a big fan of Joe, and then I got this album, and it just took my heart, man, and my soul, and that I haven't heard it in a long time until I knew we were getting together, and I played it last night, and I was like, it just came back to me, man, and I know that Joe was really kind of sick at that point. He was not in. He was, but the album. I mean, it was you and Cables, and I've heard live shows with you and Bob Magnuson. I just wanted you to spend a little time talking about Joe because I was born in '78, so I'm not going to pretend to be that I was a journalist at that time. But you know, he was given the mantle of being the next Coltrane. It was kind of unfair, but he was he was a ridiculous player. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about Joe.
You know, I was a huge fan of Joe Farrell for any number of reasons and recordings, but certainly the work he did with Elvin as part of the trio and that album they made, Putting It Together.
Oh my God, yeah.
I count myself as very fortunate because I got to see that band play live a few nights in a row when they came to Atlantic City, New Jersey. And you know, Joe did a lot of session work in New York, and after I moved to Los Angeles to join Weather Report, I think he and I started working together in one of the local clubs. It was a place called Pasquale's. So named because it was owned by Pasquale or Pat Senator, wonderful bass player whose biggest gig might have been with Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. He did that for a number of years.
Happy birthday, Herb Alpert.
Is it his birthday?
It's his birthday, yeah. No April Fools, yeah, man. Yeah.
There we go. So, you know, I was working with Joe, and I'm not sure if it was Joe bringing me to the attention of John Koenig at Contemporary Records. But at any rate, one of the first albums I got to make as a jazz drummer, outside of, you know, being a member of a band, was this album Sonic Text on the Contemporary label. And it was a nice band. It was Freddie Hubbard, Joe Farrell, of course.
Tony Dumas, unbelievable. You and Dumas, man, are so good.
Tony was a great player. Still, I mean,
yeah,
he's
still a great player. Yeah.
And Joe was in fine health at the time. He was a character. I mean, his drug use. I was a bit naive, and I wasn't aware of what was going on. And within a year or two, I remember we were doing a short tour of the West Coast, and Joe's arm got infected quite badly, and it got infected because of the unsterilized needle or something like that. but he had to go to the emergency room, and I said, Joe, what happened to your arm? And he said, I banged real hard into a doorknob, And I was like, oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, sorry, man.
He cut a hilarious figure, especially in later days, because he would he wore riding boots, and he'd have his pants tucked into the boots.
Oh, I love this.
And he had a long cigarette holder for his cigarette, and usually a hat or a cap of some sort of distinction, and always with the sunglasses, no matter the time of day. But boy, when he played, it was just so much fun. He was just a hard bop, burning saxophone player, and because of Joe and that album, that gave me opportunity to do other work with John Koenig at Contemporary Records, leading up to my own first album.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think you were. I mean, that was kind of the pocket of time that I fell in when I got into music, was because you were on Cable's Vision, and then you did your own record as a leader. I actually, if I remember interviewing George, and he talked about, I think that Sonic Text was done in like the back room in a warehouse. Do you remember the recording where it was done?
Well, that back room or warehouse was the Contemporary Record studio.
I love it.
And so you had all these steel shelves with cardboard boxes for shipping, and albums and album covers, and somehow all of this seemed to form a really great acoustic space. Very tiny recording console, and I have a photo. It's too bad that I'm glad we're speaking and it's audio only, and I celebrate that. But if this were also a video kind of a podcast thing, I could show you the photo of Bernie Kirsch, who for many years was Chick Corea's recording engineer. A very young Bernie at this very small console engineering that album, Sonic Text. And that was the first time I got to work with Freddie. And,
wow.
And so we became, it felt like we had become friends instantly. And one of the Weather Report albums had been out, and I saw a review sitting around the recording studio, sitting around Contemporary Records. And it was in some newspaper, a magazine
Sure.
or something. And Freddie walks in the room, and I just read the sentence. As far as Peter Erskine, the drummer goes, I can think of at least 500 other drummers I'd rather listen to than him.
That's what the article said.
That's what the review said, and I said to Freddie, I said, wow, I don't even know if I can think of 500 other drummers, and Freddie read it, and he said, let me look at that. He goes, wow. He goes, that's some cold shit, man. He said, don't worry about that. And so that felt good.
I love that, man. That's so
Freddie.
great, man. Thank God, Freddie. because I've talked to enough guys that played with him that, he could have a split personality, big time. And I just think, but at the core, a beautiful heart. I really want to go back to did you go to the club that you saw Elvin and Jimmy and Joe? Can you just talk about, or was it Jimmy Garrison, or?
It was Jimmy Garrison. It was not a club, believe it or not.
Whoa.
It was the Steel Pier. It was in their ballroom, which every few years the famed ballroom at the Steel Pier in Atlantic City would get washed away in a hurricane. So they replaced it with a very large geodesic dome structure. And this one summer, whoever was booking the talent there, it was just incredible what they were bringing in. So I got to see Basie's band several nights in a row. I saw Duke's band. I saw the band Dreams.
Oh,
One of their very
so it was like
early,
71, right in that pocket
yeah.
there. Yeah, I did.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then the Elvin Trio, yeah, might have, maybe it was that same summer. But I remember I just went night after night because, wow, I mean, you were just feet away from these incredible players. Now Freddie, getting back to him real quick,
Yeah,
he was a. I always thought Freddie was a sweetheart and a very funny guy who did have this other side to him. Now the second time we played together was on the George Cable's album you mentioned, Cable's Vision.
Yes.
But now instead of the Contemporary Studios, we're recording in a larger room that. It was part of the old United Western Studio complex.
Interesting. I'll have to look that up.
Anyway, so it's Ernie Watts, Freddie, myself, Bobby Hutcherson, George, of course, and Tony Dumas. And the first day, every time Freddie would look at me, he would just kind of chuckle and had a little bit of a sinister quality. And he'd just look at me kind of sideways, and he'd go, rookie. Rookie. So I'm thinking, wow, I don't know if I need 4 more days of this. So on the way to the studio the next morning, I stopped at a liquor store. I was riding a motorcycle back in those days, so I pulled the motorcycle into the liquor store. I buy a large bottle of Remy Martin VSOP cognac and put it in my backpack and get to the studio, and Freddie shows up, and I said, "Hey, Freddie." He goes, "What?" I said, "Here you go." And it wasn't wrapped or anything. I just handed him the box, and he goes, "What's this for?" I said, "Just out of respect, man. Just showing respect." And so I think I might have bribed my way into his permanent good graces. But we and what's funny, like Freddie would come to gigs when I was playing with my band in town, and one time we're flying to Japan, and he came up to me and he said, "Man," he said, "I really like your new album," and he sang one of the melodies from it.
The one you made on Contemporary?
No, this was one of the ECM albums.
Unbelievable. So he really got into it.
Yeah, I was like,
beautiful.
wow. And hey, Freddie, what have you been up to? And at one point, he said, "I just came back from New York." He said, I was making a record with Cecil Payne," and then he said, "Man, I thought that motherfucker was dead."
I mean, all I can tell you is that because Carl Burnett, the skipper Henry Franklin, a couple of dear friends of mine, and they told me that in the mid '70s when they were on tour with Freddie, they were playing a bill with the Crusaders, and Freddie's band opened, and then I guess Freddie at some point in the set didn't really like the way the audience was dealing with the music, a lot of chatter and talking, and so they finished the set, and Freddie gets on the mic and starts berating the audience, just like screaming, like, what the hell's wrong with you? F-bombs flying. The Crusaders had to come in, kind of get him off the stage in order to keep the show together. Phil Ranlin talked to me about him, like Freddie challenging him to a fight. You know what it is? It's like what Carl Burnett said was that for as crazy as Freddie could be sometimes, when he was on, he made up for everything. It made up. He was on. He may have been the best. Really, I mean, in terms of like, it doesn't even matter who the best is. But the point is that these guys were such characters, man. Like, I mean, to me, Peter, like, I just wanted you to talk to younger cats about the essence that, whether or not you ever hung with these guys or not, but it's the Papa Joe Joneses, the Freddie Hubbards, the Dizzies. I mean, to me, like, we're so lacking in leadership today. And I'm not saying that jazz was ever, I mean, it was popular music at one time in this country. But it was a black subculture primarily through the 70s. But the fact that you were able to just hang with these guys, play with these guys, I mean, can you talk about the essence that they still have inside of you today?
Well, thanks for the question. To me, the essence, or at least my first thought or response to a question about the essence, Jake, is that they were vitally interested in paying it forward.
I love it.
They wanted to, they loved the music, and they wanted to make sure that it was in good hands. And there was never a sense of any of these artists holding back to give you advice. Now, oftentimes the advice could be brusque or
Get to the point. Yep.
yeah,
Yeah.
and that was fine. For all the stories though that I've heard about various jazz characters, I ran into Charles Mingus on an elevator in Chicago, and the gentleman could not have been nicer to me. He was completely encouraging, and I walked out of that elevator like on cloud nine, because I was like, man, what a great thing to run into one of my heroes, and he was such a nice person. So I can't really even think of any of the great masters not being generous. Now they wouldn't suffer fools gladly, and it naturally occurred to me, but I was always conscious of showing only the greatest respect to these people. Because what other way can you thank them for all the musical pleasure and musical information that they provided? So,
Do you feel like did you get the memo at that time about playing it forward or passing it forward, or just, you're even just in the first 10 minutes of our conversation, you've been so courteous, just thanking me for things, and sort of, and I just wonder, like, if there was ever a time when your ego was really invested in or have you always been in that pay it forward kind of mentality?
Well, I discovered it when I was 7 and went to these summer jazz camps, and all of a sudden there you are with Louis Hayes,
Yes.
in a drum class, or Alan Dawson, and the list goes on and on. Stan Kenton started these camps back in, I think, 1959, and my parents took me to one in 1961. So dig who else was at that camp in 1961. Don Grolnick, Keith Jarrett, Randy Brecker, David Sanborn, Lou Marini Jr.
Bob James?
No, Bob.
I'm just wondering if that was the one where. This was earlier. This is 61. So you were actually. I know all. What a ridiculous roster. Who were the judges?
No, there were no judges. This was a camp.
It was a camp. Okay.
A learning camp. So the entire Kenton band was there.
Wow.
Later in I think it was 1963 and 64. Instead of my parents having to drive me all the way out to Bloomington, Indiana, because I grew up back east in New Jersey, they had one of the stage band camps up in Connecticut, at the University of Connecticut, and the name of the town is Storrs, Connecticut.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Ron Carter was one of the instructors, and I was speaking with Ron not too long ago, and he told me, he said, it was kind of crazy, but I was teaching there, and then I would rush back to New York. I was playing the Vanguard every night. I think he was doing some live album. Then he'd come back up to Connecticut, and he would teach. It was just remarkable. And Ron, when I was young, when you're young, you're trying to figure out how language works and power dynamics and all the things that you have no idea how to
Yes.
grapple with.
Yeah.
And he took me to task, and it made it was an important being taken to task. And I was always mindful of only showing the greatest respect, particularly afterwards. But that didn't come hard. I loved all these people.
Well, no, but first of all, he knew. Can you just talk a little bit about, like, he basically was in front of people, kind of said, "You got to get back in the shed," or what did he do?
I just no, it was just I said something dumb, and
He's done that. He did that to me, but I mean, on the radio. But you know what? Like, he's like my biggest supporter, and I feel like that he saw in you somebody who had a lot of potential, but he wanted to push you.
Yeah, that's paying it forward.
That's right.
The trick when I'm teaching at the University of Southern California at the Thornton School of Music, and the school's a great magnet. We attract wonderful talent, but it is trying to clue these young musicians into this is it may not be like this in the real world, but this was the real world that we grew up in.
Right.
It's funny. I was just checking out some old Woody Herman videos, and like the band in the early '60s had the piano player named Nat Pierce.
Yes.
And Nat came on the Kenton band to sub for Stan Kenton when Stan had an aneurysm and was in the hospital. So, I mean, basically the guys in Woody's band couldn't stand the Kenton band. They hated it. But Nat was doing it as a favor, because Stan was ill. And I would go up to the front of the bus after a gig. We might be doing a couple 100-mile drive to the next town. So
I love. By the way, I need a picture of you, that bus on that from that Creative World from '74, where everybody's outside of the bus. I mean, that is so great, man. Go ahead.
That was and
that is the coolest thing ever. Man. I'm like, this is America, man. This is where it's at.
Well. I couldn't do it now, but back then it was a real.
Anyway, I don't want to get you off. Nat Pierce, go ahead.
We had everyone had a pair of seats. There was no bunk. You learned to sleep, kind of sitting up. And anyway, so I go up to the front of the bus, and the wheels are, humming along on the interstate, and Nat's telling stories, and I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm asking him about this, that. And at some point, almost every evening, he'd look over at me and he'd chuckle and he'd go, "You're a nice kid." He goes, "You can't play." Let me start that over.
Please.
He goes, "Yeah, you're a nice kid." He said, "You can't swing for shit, but you're a nice kid."
Boy, that makes it. You're like, boy, well, I can't wait. I'm going to sleep real well tonight after that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, man.
And I don't have masochistic tendencies.
No.
But when these guys gave you some feedback or advice, all right, well, this is what I work on. I mean, some of my best lessons when I was a student at Indiana University, the teacher would give me a challenge to do something early in the lesson, and if I didn't do it to his satisfaction, he would point out what was wrong, and then he'd say, "Now get out." And that was his way of telling me, "You better find a practice room right now and start working on this."
I just want to. I want to interject for a second, and then you can riff on it, because maybe you can give an example. The late great Mark Levine, the piano player. When he was at Berkeley, in fact, he was not at Berkeley. This is how great it was at that time. He was in Boston playing in a salsa band with Don Elias and Gene Perla, and then he would go to Jackie Byard's house for lessons. And a lot of people don't know Jackie played drums too. So Mark would show up for the lesson, and Jackie would get on the drums, and he'd say, "Okay, let's play Cherokee in all 12 keys." And Mark would start out, and then maybe at F or something, he'd fall apart, and it was like a 10-minute lesson. Jackie's like, "Okay," Now you know what you need to work on. I'll see you next week. It was real simple. Is there a way to talk about like what your and what was his name, the professor, and kind of because to me it's like you give 3-hour seminars. I just remember Hampton Hawes saying, you can intellectualize the music all you want. We talk for 2 hours. You haven't played a note yet, and I just wonder what your if you give an example of what he wanted you to get in the practice room right away doing.
Okay, well, two examples. The first was, I'll go in chronological order. The first was when I was a freshman, and we had been working on these very challenging snare drum etudes and exercises that were in different time signatures and had these very complex rhythms. And he waves me, okay, fine, stop. He says, get out your Podemsky snare drum method book and turn to page 25. Now, the Podemsky book was a very basic, like for beginners book. And page 25 had a series of rhythms. It was in 2/4 time, and they were all quarter notes and eighth notes. And so I'll just tap it out for you
Sure.
on the snare drum here. If at the tempo I was expecting, it would be like. So on and so forth. And he goes, I'm looking at it like, oh, great, quarter notes, eighth notes, I got this. And he snapping his fingers. So he goes, okay, you hear that? He goes, each one of those is a measure. I'll play it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, go. So now I'm sight reading, so on and so forth. So that goes by pretty quick. And by the second or third line, I kind of crash and burn. He takes a satisfied puff on his cigar. And he says, now, come back next week, be able to play that and anything else in the book at that tempo without a single mistake.
Oh, my.
Now get out. So I taught myself, okay, what do I need to be able to do? I obviously need to be able to understand what these rhythms are, but then to be able to read quickly enough, which means you have to be looking ahead, which means as you're playing one measure, you're already at the next measure, and particularly if it's the next line down or the next page, whatever. So I even taught myself how to go to the end of the bar and read backwards. So if there was a gobbledygook of rest in the middle of the bar, I didn't have to, because you don't have time to count that stuff. So it was a great opportunity to figure out what's the best way to read. And so he was a teacher who could show you how to do things, but better than that, he showed you how you could discover how to do things. The next instance came after I had left college. I went on the road with the Kenton Band, and then went back to college. This is Professor George Gaber, by the way. He was the classical percussion instructor.
Wow.
And he didn't like how heavy-handed my touch had gotten when I was on the road. So at some point, he stops whatever we're doing, and he holds up a triangle beater, and I grab it from him. And he points to a triangle in the corner of his studio, and he says, "I want you to play that triangle, mezzo piano. You get one chance." And I go over and tap it, and he just shakes his head side to side. He goes, "Nope, too loud. Get out." So then I start practicing.
Too loud.
Drummers were always working on like, all this kind of stuff.
Of course.
And instead, I start practicing.
Wow.
How softly can that wasn't that soft, but how softly can I play, and how consistently can I do that? And so
He was still in. You were still in school at the time, or he came to see a gig and was like, "You're playing too loud."
I had gone back to school.
Okay.
I went. It was a strange situation because I was the guy who left the gig to return to school, and everyone else in school was like,
leaving the school
can't
and
wait
going
to
to
get
the gig.
out,
Exactly.
so they can get the gig.
Yeah.
So, education comes in different shapes and forms, and I had every intention of finishing college, but then Maynard Ferguson called, and I turned it down. I turned it down 3 times. The 4th time, I finally said, "Okay, I'll do the summer tour." And then by the time I was halfway through the first set, on the first gig, I knew I wasn't going to go back to school. I was just having too much fun. And then eventually that's how I met Jaco Pastorius and started working with Weather Report, and then moved to California, and then meet Joe Farrell and play with him at a club.
I'm just having a ball with Peter Erskine. You know, we have a game on this program called Name That Voice. I don't know. Don't worry about naming the voice, but pay attention to the content, and we'll come back and break it down.
All right.
Anyway, he said, well, you know, because they had this term avant-garde, you know, and they were talking about the so-called free. And he said, man, the free avant-garde music was what we were doing on Blue Note, not Shep.
Really?
And Albert Elliott and all that.
Really?
He said that. He said, man, and that was the first I heard of it back then, because those cats was doing their thing around, but I didn't say anything about them. Wasn't nobody putting them down. Now, except for Eric Dolphy doesn't belong in them class. Eric was a traditional musician. He knew changes. He knew everything. He could play. He played in the orchestra, in the American Symphony Orchestra. So he's separate from them dudes. Even like Train is separate. But them cats, even Shep and Albert, them cats couldn't play no tunes. They couldn't play no changes.
Okay, this is really important. So Crouch, going back to Crouch,
changes.
rest in peace, Stanley Crouch. He identified these mid-'60s Blue Note albums as the real avant-garde stuff because there were they were actual tunes.
Well, yeah, because you could hear all the tradition in what we were doing. We could swing, we could play the blues, and we played changes. We were running through changes. We just stretched it out. But them cats couldn't do that.
Well, what could they do that was inspired? Were you inspired by them?
What they could do is what they did. What they did, that's what they could do.
Well, what were they doing? Was it noise?
Yeah.
It was noise. Okay.
What they call altissimo. It's called altissimo. The squeaks and squawks. Altissimo.
Mr. Erskine, actually, ironically enough, I'll give you a clue. That cat, well, obviously he played on some Blue Note albums, but he played a lot with Freddie Hubbard, including on the album Breaking Point. I don't know if you know that album, but that was Joe Chambers.
Joe Chambers.
Now, Peter, I've been kind of just bouncing this off these healers.
I gotta interrupt you because
because I want to. You can go. The floor is yours after this. My question is this, because you can go in the aisle, you can go anywhere you want on this. But my question for you is, because you have both two camps here, people that, Joe was in competition with Eiler and Shep for gigs. He didn't, and I just wanted to ask you, the real question was, who were like Sonny Murray, Beaver Harris, who were the most free drummers that you loved? And did you ever play, what was the most free context? Did you respect that kind of music? And what was the most free context you ever played in? The floor is yours.
You know, when I was in junior high school, I was kind of a split, not musical personality, but a young musician with interests in both classical music and jazz, and was a big Beatles fan at the same time. So I was listening to a number of different things, so let's see. Classically, I got hip to Stravinsky about the same time I got hip to Beethoven. discovered Varese pretty quickly, and then got into Bartok, and then one thing leads to another, and I'm listening to Messiaen, and this Messiaen recording led me to Ornette Coleman.
Wow.
And so at around the same time, you'll remember the old label ESP.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and so Albert Eiler was someone I got a chance to listen to, and I think hold on just a second.
Sure, man. I know. I'm sorry I threw so much at you there. That was ridiculous, but
No.
Yeah.
Hang on just a second.
Yeah.
I'm just dealing with the. You can edit that, right?
Of course, yeah, we'll edit it out, man.
All right. So, I think I was getting little bits of Cecil Taylor. Most of my jazz listening, though, was more grounded, like in Art Blakey, Max Roach, then Grady Tate, which was kind of he was my gateway drug to Roy Haynes, and of course Elvin, because if something was on impulse, I was interested.
Absolutely.
In that.
Totally.
But I think maybe Milford Graves might have been.
Oh, I love it. I freaking love it.
Because when I listen to Ghost, the pulse is so strong, even if it has the appearance or the semblance of free. I don't think you could be a timbalero in New York without having an unbelievable sense of time. And so when someone has such an innately strong sense of time, no matter what they play, it's present. Mm-hmm. It's there. Mm-hmm. And Andrew Surreal, because of the I was always intrigued by him, particularly because he used non-traditional playing apparatus. Let's say knitting needles or whatever. He would play the drums, right. And this was around the time that some classical percussionists were releasing recordings of various pieces, like by Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, and so all this stuff kind of made sense to me, even though I remember, again, it was George Gaber. We were playing some free stuff because I was in David Baker's band at Indiana University.
This is great.
And David always said, you got to free it up. So we're doing this kind of free thing, and my teacher pokes his head in at the end of the day, and I'm thinking, oh man, this is so modern. I don't know if this guy can even begin to dig what we're doing, because this is so modern. And he waits the next lesson, and he finally says, I heard you the other night. And I said, yeah, I saw you pop your head in the door for a bit. He said, yeah, that sounded good. He said, it didn't sound like the three of you were listening to one another. He said, but it sounded good what I heard. So back to the drawing board.
Right.
That's really what it's about.
Yeah.
Listening. And then, of course, to play with any kind of commitment, then you also have to have some very strong sense of direction, even if you decide to abandon it. For me, looking back, I started doing this thing during the lockdown, and people were asking me, pick your 5 favorite drum tracks, and I said, well, that's dumb. I can't do that.
Sure.
I'll pick 10, and then I went, 10's stupid. So I started, 50.
Right.
And after about 4 days, I was like, that's not enough. That's it. So I went to 100, and then I changed the name to the Infinity Drummers List.
Love it.
And between 500 and 600, I stopped for a bit. But it's really been great going back and listening to stuff. And I went back to really listen to Milford Graves. Not extensively, but what I did listen to, I listened to a bit exhaustively. And I was just kind of more in awe every time I listened to something. So never too late to catch up and listen to things. Now, when you were playing that excerpt of the Joe Chambers,
Yes.
and I was a big fan of Joe Chambers, particularly from the Bobby Hutcherson Total Eclipse album.
Absolutely.
But I also loved his playing with Chick Corea on the Tones for Jones Bones.
Is he playing drums? You're darn right he is, my God. Yeah, I know. The Bobby Hutcherson, Harold Land stuff is amazing, too.
Yeah, it's incredibly great. So anyway, you mentioned Stanley Crouch, and I was playing the Village Vanguard. This is back when I lived in New York. I lived in New York for 5 years, between 1982 and 1987. And I go back to the kitchen, and I take out a cigar, and the guy says, "Hey, what are you smoking?" And it was a Cuban. And I said, "Oh, it's one of these." I said, "Would you like one?" "Sure." We didn't even introduce ourselves to one another. And, okay. And he's there the next night. And he gives me a cigar. Oh, that's a nice cigar, you know. So I think it might have been the third night. John Abercrombie or somebody said, "What are you doing hanging out with Stanley Crouch?" I said, "That's Stanley Crouch?" I had no idea, you know.
So there was never any inclination to be like, "Hey, I'm Peter," and introduce.
No. I mean, I figured he knew who I was because he was there. Listen, right. I saw him listening.
Yeah, right.
It's some guy listening.
What do you do, John? Man, rest in peace, man.
Yeah, and Stanley was a very nice man, and so our only interaction, I think, was kind of on a cigar level.
You know what it is. What I kind of, and because this is so fascinating, because you were really coming at a time like you were so in the moment, right when. God, that I hate labels, but when that fusion movement really started to take hold in the early '70s, and I just. And what Joe was saying, he goes on to say that they couldn't play. Those guys couldn't play changes. They couldn't back up a singer. They couldn't keep a gig at Radio City. And so a lot of the more established, where with the Blue Note albums that you talked about, Total Eclipse and those, you could hear the traditions, you could hear the blues, they played changes, and then they added a little bit of new vocabulary on it. That's what Crouch was saying that it was. And so you'll get these two different forms of people saying, well, okay, jazz, like they lost me. I don't hear any tradition in it. And yet guys like Shep and Isla were saying, why is that the metric for being an established jazzer? Just knowing all the songbook tunes and playing them and knowing bebop? Let's do something different. Because Shep, those guys could play that, right? And I just want to get your thoughts on, I was a little bit surprised, although Schofield last week, I think he just said, he goes, Chambers was in competition for gigs with those guys. So, of course, they were, sort of, he's like, they can't play, But I wanted you to talk a little bit about even when you were coming up, was it still sort of like, what was it about, like, what was the metric for being an established pro? Like, knowing the songbook, having the bebop licks, and were you one of those guys that was like, dude, that's not what it is. I'm going to keep stretching the vocabulary.
No, I was always pretty quick to recognize my limitations.
Sure.
Now, as a drummer, particularly with large ensembles or almost any ensemble, a sense of ownership of the music is a very important quality to possess and to project, because we're the bus driver. You take a seat on a bus, you want to have confidence that the driver knows how to operate the machine.
Absolutely.
And knows where he or she are going, so you don't have to pay attention to all that. You can relax and read your book or whatever. So our job is to provide rhythmic information of whatever style or texture or contour, and I think, to play in such a way that the other musicians play better. That's not an original thought. That was Buddy Rich paraphrasing something that Papa Joe Jones said many years before. So, whether the beat is free or has a if it's very dense, if it has frenetic energy, or if it's very calm or very open. Jake, you know what the for me the qualifications have to do tone.
Yes.
If a musician has good tone, more often than not, they have a pretty good understanding of music, and therefore they'll have good time. There needs to be some measurable quality of harmonic knowledge. Now, it doesn't mean I want to hear them play all the things you are, but harmonic knowledge means that in the improvisation or in the composition of something, that the leading tones, the inner threads of what's going on musically, have some level of aesthetic, not only pleasure giving qualities, but wonderment. That people respond. We often don't know why we respond to something. I was trying to explain counterpoint to one of my students.
Right.
And I said, okay, how do I explain it? I said, have you ever been to Disneyland? And he goes, yeah. I said, so if you went to Disneyland, chances are pretty good you stayed until the fireworks show in the evening, right? And he goes, oh, yeah. And, okay, so you got the fireworks, and one of the high points is, the Tinkerbell flies across the sky.
Right.
And boo 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 when you wish upon a star, right? And they go, yeah. And I say, and that's a nice melody. It's a very pretty melody, and most of us are familiar with it. He goes, yeah. I said, so it's not the melody that gives you the goosebumps, but it's the counterpoint. It's that French horn line that the skilled writer put in there. And when those French horns do that counter line, you're not even consciously aware that, oh my goodness, I've got goosebumps, because it provides a resonance for many people, not everybody, but it's this is just old showbiz stuff, like in a Broadway show. I mean, it's the skilled writer who, wow, that's really nice. And so when stuff comes along that doesn't contain some of the elements, it's not that we're squares, but you do look for compositional elements, and by that, Jake, I'm talking about the built-in tension and release of something. So you could look at an abstract painting, and try to that represents a cow, or that's supposed
right.
to. It's just
right.
You just wow. Within this thing that I'm looking at has an incredible energy that is doing this, or it has no energy, but it's providing something. So art, if it doesn't function on some level to provoke a response, then it might be art that's either not for you, or it just might not be art. And consumerism, along with, stuff changes. I mean, and we always risk sounding like, old guy check.
Yeah, I don't know. I want to ask you something though. Like, you talk about the knowledge of the harmonic. I remember, and I wanted to ask you about this too. Like with your students, most of your generation, even older generations, they learned the music by ear before they learned to read music. We were an auditory society for the most part. TVs were still relatively new. You might hear something on the radio. The point is that Charlie Parker listened to everything on the radio, and then he learned to play it in every key. But what Gary Bartz told me was that, in fact, and he works at Oberlin now, but the fact is that kids today, because we are saturated with visual material, are coming up learning to read music before they learn to hear it. And as a result, their ears are locked, which is one reason why there's a homogenization of sound. I can't really tell who cats are today, when in the past, it doesn't matter if Sonny Rollins, Gary Bartz, John Coltrane, Pete LaRocca, Mickey Roker, everybody had their own sound. How do you account for that original sound? And do you think that are cats learning to read before they hear in modern times?
Gary would probably know much better than me, but it brings an interesting question up, because what I noticed, and let's say we'll talk about tenor
Sure,
players, because jazz history is just there's so many iconic tenor players, each of whom had their own sound and style. And it seemed after Michael Brecker, then you had the Joe Lovano kind of era of influence, and then,
Absolutely,
and then Chris Potter, and then I was having trouble. I just mentioned to some colleagues, I said, I'm not. I'm hearing some tenor players, and I just can't put my finger on anything. I'm just not, and it's not denigrating anyone's style, and they certainly can play the changes, and they're good. But I think what we were used to, and it's a nice play on the word standards. Is that a song that was universally known or agreed upon provided a platform to establish the standard playing level of someone. So
you're nailing this. Thank you so much. Yeah. You articulated that. Go ahead.
Okay. So the international language, you could be anywhere in the world, and you call a standard, and they, all right, not only does this person understand how to navigate through chord changes, they're a good melodist, but yeah, I can hear that they've listened to Phil Woods, or they've listened to Charlie Parker, or they've listened to Gene Ammons, or they've listened to whoever, and the list could go on and on.
Prez.
So it gives you a handle, at least, like that's where they're coming from, and so if that might guide some of the choices I'm going to make in my playing, because I know now, without having spoken a word, that they've listened to this, that, and the other thing. And so when you get a player that doesn't, I'm going to answer it this way, Jake. I encourage my students. I say, don't be afraid to let your influences come through, because it lets us know, who you've listened to, and what has informed you up until now to make the choices you're making. I had my Mr. Miyagi teaching moment the other day.
Oh, I want to hear this, dude.
So one of my students, at the end of the lesson, I said, "Do you have any questions?" He goes, "Well, yeah." He said, "I'm having trouble making decisions." I said, "You're having trouble making decisions?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh yeah?" And I grabbed something from the desk and I threw it right at his head, and he caught it. I said, "Did you have to make any decisions? Did you have time?" He said, "No." I goes, "That's your answer." So it's it's the training ahead of time. You can't, if you're sitting around like, should I play this? Should I play that? The moment's already passed.
You just hit on so much amazing stuff. I just the other guy that's in my heart today is a guy you probably were on staff with at Thornton College, was Ndugu Chancellor, rest in peace. And Ndugu told me that when he was at USC, up till his passing, he said that, we get these phenomenal students, amazing, some of them come internationally, some get a scholarship to come and things like that. He's like, and it's great because they can play together. I don't see them, unfortunately, playing enough with the guys with rubber bands around their horns, guys that really played the blues, that, and they weren't necessarily, they were street scholars. They weren't from the academy per se. And I wonder about your experience, even pre-Kenton. Did you have a chance to play with some blues cats, like where you just learned the visceral, where you were able to drop into the primordial gut and just burn? And really, it wasn't an intellectual exercise. It was just coming from that place of the blues.
No, these were lessons that took a while for me to learn. Your daddy's rich and your mama's good looking. I mean, I grew up and my father was a doctor, and
just to be clear, I mean, just because you could be, Miles was rich, Miles came from money, he could play the blues, so that's irrelevant. Go ahead.
I went to music schools. I went to these summer jazz camps, just to be able to play jazz. I mean, I couldn't do it at our local high school, and there weren't that many other young jazz musicians where I grew up, so I went to a music boarding school. I mean, this was primarily a classical music school, and then we had a jazz big band. The teacher there, a gentleman named Dave Sporney, made sure that we were listening to the right things. And then I think getting to work with David Baker got me a bit closer. Getting on the Kenton band took me a whole other direction. And so it was a matter of confronting what I couldn't do, confronting what I didn't know, confronting the parts that, as Ndugu put it, need more rubber. I still haven't spent enough time with the musicians that have the rubber bands around their horns. But I do the best I can to honor the music by listening to it and by understanding the power of the blues, and I know how to swing. I've spent enough time playing the instrument. I know how to do that, and how I pass that along to my students by having them transcribe and play Joe Williams' vocal performances on the drum set. So I try to get it. I try to get it to this very visceral level on the kit, and we do call and response kinds of things. But no, there are parts of my growing up or my musical training that nobody can be 1,000% complete in all areas. So what I might lack in these qualities that Ndugu mentioned, perhaps there's a compensating factor, somewhere else that at least I could provide good musical service to some other situation.
Totally. No, you know what it is? More to the point, I just wonder how you feel inside, being that you're a very genuine cat. So yeah, you weren't playing with, Otis Spann or, Lightning Hopkins or people like that. But the point is, even within the academy, for you still were able to get a lot of live bandstand experience. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about, to me, it's so crushing for me, is that you have so many young cats who are authentic and they're hungry, they're searching, regardless of whether you can put your finger on individual sound or not. And there's no places to play. There's no gigs,
Well, yeah,
and that's really the issue, is that you guys had these gigs where even if you were having a crappy day, you could get it out of your system on the bandstand with a bunch of guys that hopefully you trusted and maybe even liked. And that to me is like, that's what Kenny Burrell said. I mean, they're having jam sessions in the student union at UCLA, which is cool, but I mean, you were in these Pasquales or Dantes. You couldn't not necessarily even hear your drum kit sometimes. I mean, the point is that you fought through it on the bandstand. I mean, how do we get over that? Is that going to be the vexing issue? Is there any solution on the other side?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, even by the time I was playing in clubs, it'd be a gig here, it'd be a gig there. You might have a few days, a few nights. I mean, somewhere.
Sure.
Whereas our heroes, it was 50 weeks a year. They're playing maybe 3-4 sets a night. Oftentimes opposite some of the greatest bands in the history of the music, and so they had to play at they had to be at the top of their game, and so that many nights in a row trying to be at the top of your game, man, that's thousands of flight hours of experience, right?
Yeah.
And so players my generation, we couldn't get close to that. Young people today really don't get nearly the chance. But we're all a product of our times, and so they are coming up with some other means of expression, and so you have young musicians who are doing video editing that would have challenged professional video editors just a few years ago.
Yes.
And they're so it might not swing the same way. It might not. I don't know, but I'm not ready to write off it because I hear young players and I'm just kind of astonished at how good they are.
I guess maybe
I think a lot of what we were doing at the peak of our whatever, it was not appealing to a lot of the musicians who were a couple generations older than us.
It's more a mindset, and again, maybe first of all, you must have been on the road 50 weeks a year with Kenton in the 70s,
mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah, it was.
So, I mean, and you were always able to sing for your supper on the bandstand until you decided to, to move in a different direction. But I just wonder, even when you were in New York from 82 to 87, when did fundamentally we get to this? Because it's not about the musicians. It's about the ability of people to say, oh, we're going to pay you. Not that anybody was ever getting super rich, but we're going to pay you because we recognize the sophistication and genius of this music, whereas now it's, oh, you can pay to play, or you can play for the door. Like, as a society, did you see that in your own career? Where the gig, people used to be able to play pizza joints for, bongos and guitar 6 nights a week and be able to make their living. I mean, to me, it's like, what happened to the ability for, I remember Charlie Persip saying, they used to, when he was on tour with Dizzy, people would say, oh, you're playing music. He said, we're not playing, man. Playing connotates like that this is some sort of free, fun activity. We're not playing. And yet we're now at a point now in our society where people look at music and say, oh, it's so much fun. How can we can't monetize this. This is unquantifiable. That's what bothers me, is that it's fed my soul. The music has helped me find my voice. It's completely unquantifiable, and we're living in an age of complete analytics. And I just wonder, if you saw that at the tail end of your career, or not that you're done with your career, but I mean, when you stopped playing and singing for your supper on the bandstand.
You want to know where the problem is?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just a little larger than the size of a deck of playing cards, and it's got a lot of electronics in it. And
it's a drum machine.
No, it's a smartphone. And so whatever type of smartphone you have, and they're incredible devices, but they've changed everything.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's different.
Break
And
that down. You're saying people are distracted more. They have explain why. Because I mean, I use it as a tool to drive information, but I understand that it's suffocating people's ability to do a lot of other things. So when you say that it's, and how has it altered the landscape?
It's a little bit like that meme. We have more power in our hand than they had at Nassau, and we use it to share pictures of cats and get into arguments with strangers.
I mean, literally, Toussaint Louverture beat back Napoleon with sticks and rocks and from Haiti, and we have more power in our hand, and yet it's limited as it relates to individual sound. But I mean, the commerce base. I mean, I got another name that voice for you. I want to put this. I want you to play this for you. You might know it, and we'll come back.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
I did Bitches Brew, and we were doing this tune, Miles Runs the Voodoo Down. Now, there are outtakes that I got an opportunity to hear that were not on the record. And, man, to me, they sounded killing. But Miles wanted something different. Miles wanted a little bit more of a funky groove or whatever. Now, I had played more funk music probably than anybody that was on that session. But because Tony Williams was God drums to me, and he played with Miles, and now I was playing with Miles. I thought that's what Miles wanted, but that wasn't really what he wanted. He wanted something that was a little more funky. So, like, I'm playing, and, it sounded good to me, and then Miles came up and whispered in my ear, and he said, "You ain't getting the chicken." and basically what he wanted was something funky. So Don Lyas said, "Hey, man, I got this beat." He played this really simple beat, and I couldn't believe that I let this opportunity go because of the fact that, like, I wanted to be slicker than what Miles had asked me to do. So I was kind of despondent and, crushed, because I wound up playing shakere, playing percussion on the tune rather than playing drums. And so when the session was over, I was kind of down and sitting over in the corner. And Miles came over to me and said, "Man, what's wrong?" I said, "Well, I wanted to, be right, and I didn't think." He said, "Man, don't even worry about that, man. Be back here tomorrow at 10 o'clock. It was great. Don't worry about it." And so I learned a lesson. And see, this is what I'm saying. I mean, like, if you don't learn lessons by coming up, by triumphing over difficulties, then like your experience becomes pretty shallow. If everybody always said that you were great and never said this or said that, and sometimes people do that and they don't say anything to you, and that's a sign of really maybe they don't care for you.
Mr. Erskine, you want to take a guess at who that is? What am I hearing?
You're hearing who that is. That's Lenny White.
That is that. Yeah, yeah, that's right. What tune? What is that? That's
Check this out.
Curtis Fuller.
Check this out.
Oh my, yeah, no. Dude, is that on your Infinity tracks? Because that's my favorite album, Crankin',
Crankin'. Yeah,
oh my God, dude, that is
Crankin' is
with Stan Clark, dude.
Very young Stanley Clark.
So I just, you know what it is? I want to wrap set one with you on this note because they got to you first, but the guys that really, at 44 years old, and a non-musician, the guys that put me on their back and showed me the way to help me find my voice were Mike Clark, Greg Arico, Michael Shreve, Lenny White, and I don't want to miss any. Who am I missing from the Stick people?
From the 6 people, it's
Lenny,
it's,
Greg,
it's
Michael,
Lenny, Greg, Erico, Mike Clark,
Michael Shreve.
Michael Shreve. There's
I thought there were
David Garibaldi.
and my Jesus. So I've done multiple interviews with all these guys, and I just want to go. I want to do free association with you. What comes to mind, a couple words about their style. We'll start with Garibaldi. Maybe it's impossible to do a couple words. You just go.
No. Pinpoint precision funk showed us the way. 1,000% pleasure.
Gregorico.
You can make it if you try. Just some of the funkiest drumming and the way he played, he had this very. I mean, sometimes it was hard because they were having to lip sync.
Absolutely.
So he had this weird, exaggerated, like kind of full forearm the way he moved. So because if you snap your wrist, it's very hard to fake playing on a cymbal. And so often when we saw them on TV, they were playing along to the pre-record track. But when I finally got to see him playing, he had a beautiful natural stroke to his beat, and wow! I mean, anyone that was part of Sly and the Family Stone, I think they were all geniuses.
Have you talked to him about his relationship with Joe Zawinul?
Well, I knew that he played in the band, and I was sorry that that particular iteration did not go into the recording.
Yeah, not even beyond that. He just was like, Joe used to sit there and drink cognac. We can save that for another time. Mike Clark.
Mike Clark. You know what's fun about Mike Clark? Because I was just an instant fan when I heard the first Headhunters album he had done.
Yeah. The first one he had done, not the one that Mace did. The first one.
It was Thrust.
Yeah, Thrust, right? That's right.
And then when he told me, he said, "Yeah, I heard you play with Kenton that first summer. We all heard about this young cat, and we came and checked you out."
Whoa.
I said, "No," and he said, "Yeah, man, it sounded great." I said, "No, it's and he's hilarious." Again, another genius who's quite different, and yet all these guys, and I think it's more than just saying that they all come from the East Bay, but there is there's a wonderful liquid quality to his playing, kind of like lava, I think.
Yeah, well, Mike grew up in Texas, and then he played in Sacramento for a long time, and then obviously the formative stuff with Paul Jackson in the East Bay. Michael Shreve.
Well, Woodstock. And that's probably the same answer everyone gives. But
Yeah, no, tell me about, because we've done many interviews, and it was, for so long, it was just drove him nuts, because people would come up to him and say that, and he'd be like, "Did you check this out? Have you checked out my new thing?" And at a certain point, he said, "Shut up about Woodstock. Be happy
Enough
that
about
you
Woodstock."
well, you know what it is? In his own mind, he was saying to himself, be happy that you had an impact on people. Stop being resentful that they may not be hip to your new art. But that guy, to me, I mean, what a beauty. That guy he was going to be a priest, and he took up the drum. I mean, he to me has been, all those guys are such beautiful people,
They are, and he is very much. And I'll be honest, that I'm probably the least familiar with his output.
Sure.
I was never that much of a Santana fan.
Me neither. Yeah.
So I missed a lot of that music. I mean, I heard guys playing it in our dorm in high school. I went to that boarding school.
What was the name of the boarding school, by the way?
It was the Interlochen Arts Academy.
Oh, that's right.
Northern Michigan.
Oh my gosh, dude. Okay.
Yeah, an amazing place. Incredible.
I can't believe you just threw out that Curtis Fuller album, dude. That is the most burning. So let's finish with Len Bone. What tell me about Lenny. Red
Well,
Clay?
Red Clay. Of course, the first time I heard him was on this Curtis Fuller album. I was still in high school.
I love it, dude. I love it.
You know, the thing about Lenny is I never got to see him play. And I would listen to the Return to Forever albums, and I was just puzzled. I just, how does this guy do this? And then when I saw him, he played with an economy and efficiency of motion, and I think it had to do with the way he had the drums tuned, where the batters, where the top head of the drum was probably tuned tighter, and then he would lower the bottom head if he wanted to get a lower pitch. So he was getting a very good response out of the drums, and I thought, this guy's a genius the way he's playing. I wish I'd known this way back then, because I'd seen Billy Cobham play, and Billy played just as fast, but it took a lot of work. There was a lot of power and a lot of work, and so after seeing Billy, I became less bounce or double stroke centric and became kind of more single stroke centric, and it took me quite a few years to kind of work my way back to not approaching the drum set in quite that way. I mean, Billy was such a strong influence on me, to the point where the guys, when they detected or heard it in Weather Report, they tried to drum that out of me pretty quick. And it wasn't because of any animus to Billy. It was just that we want to hear you. We're not
absolutely, man. No, and it's funny you bring that up, because
else.
Michael Shreve said the same thing when he went to see Billy, and his power threw everybody up against the wall. And Michael said, "Well, I'm never going to be like that, so I'm not even going to try. I want to be myself."
Well, I was stupid. I tried.
No, I think a lot. You weren't the only one. Brother Erskine, can we do set 2 maybe next week or something like that, or the week after?
Yeah, you know what? Send me an email if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, we'll set something up. We have a lot more ground to cover, and
great. Yeah, this
fantastic.
has been fun. I'd be happy and honored.
Thank you, sir. Have a beautiful weekend, my friend.
All right, thanks, Jake.
I'll send you a copy later.
Talk to you later.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Another banner week here on the Jake Feinberg Show. Thanks to Peter Erskine for dropping knowledge, and we'll do it again. That's it, and we will see you later. Happy April Fool's Day. Never trust a prankster.